It's the 2022 World Cup. It's Serbia's players. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin and today we'll be looking at Serbia's squad for the 2022 World Cup. Short version, please. Well, that brings us to the end of the player-by-player discussion, and we move on to a discussion of the squad in general. So I should actually explain my shirt here. It's a little weird that I'm wearing a Canada shirt, although this mediacast is coming to you from Canada. I guess I slyly took the opportunity to slide in my Canada shirt because it looks kind of similar to Serbia's shirt, and I've confessed in a few podcasts now that my poverty of international shirts is a bit of a problem, and I just use that as an excuse to kind of wear my Canada shirt when the colors are the same. So if any Serbians are resentful of that, I am both sorry and I urge you to solve the problem by sending me a Serbian shirt. That's my solution. Okay, let's move on to some of the notes that we discussed at the top of the podcast. So I'll just kind of mention the ones that are more team-based and detail the ones that are more player-based. So at the beginning of the podcast, we noted that Serbia is a legacy of Yugoslavia. So even though the Serbian national soccer team in name has only been around since around 2006. They are descendants of Yugoslavia who have been around much, much longer. In terms of Yugoslavia's intermittent success, it actually seems more like Croatia copies that success more than Serbia does, sometimes reaching deep into the cups, but only Croatia has done that. Since the breakup, Serbia often reaches the cup, but doesn't go far, doesn't get beyond the group stage, and actually doesn't reach the Euro Cup. We question whether Serbia should be viewed as a weak European team because they're the only European team who didn't play in the 2020 Euro Cup and the only European team that is in the Nations League B. On the other hand, that's not questioning that they deserve to be here. And in terms of ranking, they are among the European teams in this cup, probably the second tier European teams in the top 25 in the world anyway. Now we'll move on to ones that are more player oriented. So we talked about formations of the team, and we noted there was a big shift after the World Cup. And that was largely due to the next point. So we'll kind of cover them both at once. It was largely due to the retirement of defensive players, especially the left back and right back, Kolarov and yikes, the name is eluding me. Kolarov and Ivanovic, Branislav Ivanovic. Huh? Whew. I think I dodged a bullet there. Those two players retiring, and really there are not many players in their position to replace them. So that has kind of forced them to change from a four-man defense to a three-man defense. And now, well, we'll talk about it a bit later, but I kind of worried that they're kind of stuck with a three-man defense because they really haven't developed players, left backs and right backs, to replace those two players. So we saw they were forced to change into a three-man defense, but I worry that that makes them a bit inflexible going forward. I mean, if I was one of the teams playing against them, I would kind of target the wings, target my attacks from the wings, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Let's talk a little bit about club affiliations for the Serbian team. So I wouldn't say top teams. Some of their players have played for top teams, but currently we really only have Filis Kostic for Juventus and maybe Ristic for Benfica. In terms of top clubs, we have maybe secondary clubs in Vlahovic also plays for Juventus. We have kind of secondary clubs like Gudelj with Sevilla. I think there's another player with Sevilla too, the goalkeeper Dimitrovic, and Fiorentina in Italy. Porto in Italy is Porto in Portugal is a big club, but I've named most of the big clubs right there. But that only represents about a quarter of the squad. So the other teams are teams like Mallorca in Spain, Torino, Fiorentina in Italy, Sampdoria. A lot of them do play for kind of second-tier clubs in Italy, and then a few with second-tier clubs in England, like Fulham. A lot of them have played in England. I think there were a couple who played with Southampton, and some of the veterans played for big clubs in England, but are now retired from the team. But it's interesting too that most of them play abroad. So I'm only seeing one player with Red Star Belgrade here. So it seems most of them move out of Serbia, probably because the other teams pay more money. So club affiliations, not amongst the top teams there, but respectable clubs nonetheless. Okay, now let's move on to a couple of the stats that I've been working on. So total players under consideration, total players called up since 2021. The average is about 48.8, and Serbia is 35. So really dealing with a smaller pool of players. I believe that's the smallest that I've seen yet. And even small clubs like Wales have 42. Qatar has 39, but most of them are over 40. So the pool of players, I don't know whether they've kept it small on purpose or whether they're just limited to that many players, as a lot of smaller countries do have a smaller pool to choose from. It's not a big problem, except the only place I would say it is a problem is in the right back and left back position. They don't seem to have players who could fill that position. So again, that kind of limits their defense to a three-man defense. In terms of kind of under consideration players, it's 31. So these are definite, likely, or possible players. Again, that's a lot less, or not a lot less, but less than most teams. The average is 33.5 there. So again, kind of showing a bit of less of a pool to choose from than some of the bigger teams. And then the candidates who are definite or likely are 21 candidates in that. So that means, and that also is quite low, although most teams are kind of between 20 and 25. The average is 21.5. So actually not really anything to speak of there. But they got to bring 26 players to the cup. And so from those 31 players, probably those 5 extra players will come. So basically choosing probably half of the possible players. But that doesn't take into account injuries or kind of players in good form that they suddenly add on to the team. And we'll try to update that in the podcast, the update podcast in November, where we might get a better idea of who is actually going to make the team. A couple of other stats in terms of age. The average age of Serbian players is 26.5. And at the beginning of this series, I would have said that that is a bit high, but actually it's lower than the average. So I am finding teams in this cup, teams in general, going with slightly older players. It used to be 25 to 27. But I haven't really seen many teams that are under 26 here. And so this turns out to be a fairly average number, even actually a bit younger than most teams. And that's kind of explainable by, we saw a lot of, especially defensive players retiring. So a lot of their older players retired after 2018 and have been replaced with younger players. To put a point on it, they only have 6 players who are over 30. The oldest is Dusan Tadic at 33. And they have 3 of the 7 players who are over 30 are actually 30. So my cat is meowing behind me. What's wrong? I think it's feeding time. But my wife usually comes home and feeds him. Anyway, so 3 of those 7 players are at 30. So a relatively young team. And then at the other end of the scale, they have 6 players who are 23 or under, and 3 of them who are 21 years old. So not looking bad in terms of age, even after the Cup. I don't see a whole lot of players retiring going into the next tournament. There are teams who you can see they will have to do a big rebuild after the World Cup here. Okay, average caps is 26.7. So with them being a bit younger, this is also a bit below average too. The average is 29.8, so perhaps a bit less experience than some of the teams that have an older age. And we'll talk about goals. A total of 112 goals among the players that are here. That doesn't mean a whole lot until we put it in perspective. So we have started relying on this stat of goals per player, and it's 13.5%, which also doesn't mean much until we compare it with other teams. And actually 13.5% is bang on average. The average is 13.6%. So they score a reasonable amount of goals. But if we look at who is scoring the goals, we really see that it's only coming from a couple of players, especially Alexander Mitrovic. So of those 112 goals, 50 of them are his. He has 50 goals in 76 games. So as we said, an incredible scoring machine. He scores at a ratio of 65.8%. There's got to be only a couple of players in the world with a scoring ratio like that. But the other forwards are quite good too. Vlahovic is at 50%, but that's 8 goals in 16 games. So that's really not enough games to make a firm statement, but it's a good start anyway. Usually we want them to have more than 20 games before we can really say anything with confidence. But still, Luka Jovic, the other forward, has 9 goals in 28 games, 32%, which is also reasonably good. And then some of the non-forwards, Dusan Tadic is at 20%, and Sergei Milinkovic-Savic is at 17%. So the numbers go down pretty steeply from there. So not a lot of players scoring. Not a lot of players scoring for Serbia, but the forwards certainly do their job and are impressive in their scoring. And we'll come back to that a bit later. Let's move on to players and issues. And so in defense, we have kind of an undecided starting keeper. So we saw that it was Dimitrovic, who seemed to be the second string keeper during the Cup, but then Rajkovic fairly quickly took over the starting position for most of the World Cup qualifying games. But since then, it's been kind of a mix, actually. Dimitrovic, Rajkovic, and Milinkovic-Savic, that's Vanja Milinkovic-Savic, the brother of the midfielder. All 3 of them played in the Nations League games in June, with Milinkovic-Savic playing both of them. So a bit uncertain as to who the keeper is going to be. Sorry, I should have saved that details for the final run through. Maybe gave a bit too much information. Anyway, the starting keeper is undecided. The other consideration in defense is that they really have too many central defenders and not enough right backs or left backs. I mean, virtually a dearth of left backs and right backs. So that forces them into a three-man back line. And I'm a bit concerned about them. This is the right place to say it. I'm a bit concerned about them not having the flexibility to move to a four-man back line. And I think teams will make a point of attacking them down the wings because they really can't adjust their formation, at least, to cover the wings. Now, maybe the players can adjust their behavior on the field. Also, it's really been a mix of who these central defenders are. But anyway, to make a long story short, it kind of seems to be a rotation of the players there in central defense. I had to pause there to let my cats go outside. That's what they were meowing about earlier in the podcast. So anyway, I'm back and we'll just finish up with central defenders. So even though they really have a lot of candidates here, they've done a pretty good job boiling it down to some main players there. However, in the midfield, I would say it's a bit more bewildering array of defensive and central midfielders. And this one was really hard to simplify for the media cast here. It seems to be too much. Basically, 5 players sharing 2 positions with a couple of others coming into the position here and there. There is a bit of consistency, though, in that they did keep pairs together. So Lukic and Gudelj played as a pair several times, and so did Maximovic alongside Grujic. So a bit of consistency there, but really seemed kind of hard to follow and hard to identify any real starters there. On the left wing, or the kind of left attacking midfield, it's a bit undecided. It seemed firmly Kostic as a starter and Mladenovic as a backup. Sorry, this is left wing, not left attacking midfielder. It seemed Kostic and Mladenovic until the 4 Nations League games, where they baffled me by using 4 different starters in those games. So I'm looking forward to the September games to see if they kind of nail down a starter for that position. The right side, on the other hand, is much more stable with Radonjic and Živkovic kind of sharing the role fairly equally. Finally, the left attacking midfielder is also undecided. 3 different players, Jurisic, Milinkovic-Savic, and Lukic, played through World Cup qualifying and friendlies, and then they all played one game in each of the 4 Nations League games. So a little unsettled as to who the starter actually is there. Again, the right side is more stable with Dusan Tadic pretty entrenched as the right attacking midfielder. And on the attack, actually, their attack looks very healthy, except they're a bit limited in their options. And what I mean by that is, especially if Mitrovic gets injured, they're really in tough if that happens. Mitrovic and Vlahovic are excellent options, and Jovic did a good job stepping in for Vlahovic and does a good job as a substitute. Vlahovic was injured for the June games. But beyond those 3, there's really not much. There's really no candidates. So I worry that if there's an injury amongst those 3, it will have a bigger effect than if they had a bigger pool to kind of choose from. So, but that's not taking anything away from the quality of those forwards who all do their job, which is scoring goals. All right, let's run through some of the new players. So I'm going to focus the discussion here just on candidates that seem definite or likely. there's a whole bunch of candidates who are possible, but a lot of them won't even make the squad. So among new candidates, we have Vanja Milinkovic-Savic. So even though his older brother is a veteran, he's new to the squad since 2021 and has just 6 caps. He's 25 years old, and he started 2 of the 4 Nations League games there, so has a chance at being a starter. Central defender Strahinja Pavlovic. Again, we get more details in the full-length version of the podcast, so I won't repeat all those details here. But the 21-year-old central defender has 21 caps already, and has worked his way into the squad quite well. Defensive midfielder Nemanja Maksimovic, we have as a likely candidate, if I didn't mention that Pavlovic above was a definite candidate, he was. The next few candidates are likely level. Nemanja Maksimovic has been with the team since 2016, but this would actually be his first tournament. And I wonder if I should have put him in here because I didn't realize he was as old as he was. Nevertheless, his first tournament would be this cup. Uros Rasic is a defensive midfielder who we consider a likely candidate. He got his first cap in 2021, in March of 2021, and is 24 years old. He plays for Valencia in Spain, so is a promising candidate here. Nemanja Gudelj is a central midfielder, one of the many vying for a starting spot there. He's actually 31 years old, but has never played in a tournament. So this would be his this moment of opportunity. He was in China for a couple of years, but has come back to play for Sevilla in Spain. So probably, possibly a revival in his career a little bit there. Sasha Lukic is our final likely candidate. He's been with the team since 2018. He is 26 years old, but hasn't been in a tournament yet. And he's working his way, getting a few more starts there. And finally, the forward, Dusan Vlahovic, kind of a promising forward for them, who we consider a definite candidate. He got his first cap in 2020 and since has 16 caps and 8 goals and is only 22 years old and plays for Juventus in Italy. So one of the more promising candidates there. Okay, for injuries, we did have a few players, including Vlahovic, who I just mentioned, who were out for the June games, but they have since played for their club. So if that's the case, we don't include them in this list. And so in this list, we only really have one injury at this point. There may be a couple more by the time we do the November update. But Uros Spahic was out with a ligament injury, a ligament rupture from late April. And he is expected to return back on November 25th. So that is actually shortly after the cup begins. So I'm sure they're keeping a close eye on him and hoping that he will return. He will be fit to return for the cup. But again, it's going to be close. We have him as a likely candidate. So it won't be a terrible loss. They have quite a few central defenders, and he's not one of the kind of starters there. So, but still, I'm sure they would like to have him as a backup. Okay, and then notable absences. We covered a lot of them in the player-by-player discussion because some of them left big holes that needed to be filled, and most of them were real veterans. So a swath of retirement, either right after the 2018 World Cup or in the time in between. Some of these guys continued playing after the World Cup but retired, let's say, in 2020 or something like that. But goalkeeper Vladimir Stojkovic, he was their starter in the 2018 World Cup and in the 2010 World Cup, as a matter of fact, but retired after the 2018 World Cup. Dusko Tosic was a central defender, actually not as much a veteran as some of the others that we're talking about here. He was a starter, though, in the World Cup 2018, even if he did lose his position for Game 3. And he's retired from soccer completely now, as is the case with Alexander Kolarov. So he is a left back, and they really haven't found anyone to replace uh, um, him in the left back position. Just three possible candidates there. And so they've reacted to this by basically not using that position anymore, which I've mentioned a couple of times in the podcast. And he retired from soccer entirely in June 2022. So the veteran was with Serbia from 2008 to 2020, 90 caps and 11 goals, and played for some pretty big clubs. On the right side, it's the same situation with Branislav Ivanovic. He was with Serbia from 2006 to 18 and had 104 caps and 13 goals in that time. And he is also retired from soccer altogether. He didn't play for the national team after the 2018 World Cup. And again, all of these players were starters in the 2018 World Cup. Nemanja Matic, wow, what a big names to lose. Nemanja Matic retired a bit more recently, actually, last appeared in September 2021, and is still playing at the club level, recently moving from Man United to Roma. But he was with Serbia from 2008 and has 48 caps and 2 goals. So, but a big loss, a big presence in the midfield. And finally, Luka Milivojevic, actually still playing at the club level for Crystal Palace, where he's been for a long time, and is just 31 years old. So actually, it was a bit of a surprise when he announced his retirement at 29 years of age. Last appearing for the team in October 2020. So he too was a starter in the World Cup, even though he too lost his position for Game 3 of that cup. So that's a lot of big names to go out. That's why they're a bit younger than the average team. And we move on now to the last order of business, which is a prediction of the starters for the cup. So I have to go back and copy the list here, and we're going to highlight in green the ones who are definite starters. The ones who are definite starters, and I've started to highlight in yellow players who are maybe in a rotation of starting, or who we expect to start a couple of games at least. And that's kind of hedging my bets, I suppose. But I should say that a lot of teams, maybe Serbia not as much as many, but a lot of teams are going with a rotation system of a couple of players rather than a defined starter with a backup, with a player in the backup position. And perhaps that's what's happening in goal. Wait, I'll do the manager first. So Dragan Stojkovic, not a lot of experience as a manager, but he was a star player for Yugoslavia. He has become their manager since 2021, so he's a definite. As far as goalkeeper goes, what I was saying there is that in the Nations League games at the end, they started to rotate these three goalies. So we have Predrag Rajkovic, Vanja Milinkovic-Savic, and Marko Dimitrovic as three definite candidates. So they're probably the ones they'll bring to the cup. The possible candidate, Marko Ilic, or even Mile Stilar. He's possible but unlikely, but has pretty impressive club affiliations, maybe work their way in. But in the four Nations League games at the end, the three definite candidates rotated, each playing one game except for Milinkovic-Savic, who played two. So that leaves us scratching our head as to who they have in mind as a starter. Perhaps the September games will shed some light. As far as defenders go, we have We divided them into the three categories because they always go with a three-man back line. So we divided them into central defender, left central defender, and right central defender. Well, among the central defenders, we have as definite candidates Stefan Mitrovic and Milos Veljkovic. And I'm going to say Milos Veljkovic is the starter there, the most likely starter, but I do think Stefan Mitrovic will start at least one game. So again, my yellow highlight kind of hedging my bets on Stefan Mitrovic. For left central defender, it's pretty clearly defined. There's really only one candidate at a definite, and he's at the definite level, and it's Strahinja Pavlovic. Almost seems certain to play in that position. And as a right central defender, we have Nikola Milenkovic. I'm going to put him as the definite because Uros Spahic is on the injury list, and it's going to be close whether he makes it or not. Certainly it'll be Milenkovic if Spahic is unavailable. But even if he comes back from his injury, I wonder if they would risk starting Spahic. So I think his injury is going to condemn him to the substitute bench if he makes the squad at all. Okay, well, left backs, we don't have any real candidates because they don't use a left back position, and all of these players who are coded as left backs, their best chance of getting onto the field is as a left winger. So nobody there. And right backs, it's kind of the same period. I think Milan Gajic did play as a winger, a right winger once, or maybe he played somewhere on the right. I remember seeing his name, but that was early in the period that we're talking about. So nobody from there. Defensive and central midfielders, we said in the notes that this was a bit of a mess with them using all sorts of players. So I'm going to mark 4 players as in yellow to denote that they will start some games. And at the end, it seemed like there was a rotation going on with Maximovic and Grulic playing as a pair sometimes, and then the other two, Gudelj and Lukic, playing as a pair sometimes. And I think it'll be something along those lines. So likely candidate, Nemanja Maximovic. The other likely defensive midfielder, Uros Rasic, I see as a substitute, not a starter. However, all of the likely central midfielders are the ones I've just mentioned: Marko Grusic, Nemanja Gudelj, and Sasha Lukic. I'm marking them all in yellow as kind of potential starters or players that I think will start some games. Okay, left and right midfielders, they haven't really used a lineup that uses those positions, so we kind of moved players out of there to the positions they've actually been playing. We move over to the left wing when it's a 4 or 5-man midfield, and we find Filip Kostic plays there regularly enough to be confident that he's a starter. And Filip Mladenovic, as a possible player to make the squad, would be a backup if he does make the squad. On the right, though, it seems to be a rotation between, well, I'll start at the beginning here. We have Nemanja Radonjic as a definite candidate. That means definite to make the squad. But if he does make the squad, he's a substitute. So he's being called up for a lot of games, but not being started in many games. So I'm not going to nominate him even as a possible starter based on the evidence I have. Rather, Andrea Zivkovic and Darko Lazovic I'm going to nominate as sharing the starting role. For some reason, I lean a little towards Zivkovic, but I can't remember why. It's just a feeling I have. Perhaps it's that he's played there more recently. Okay, among the forwards, we include left attacking, right attacking, and central attacking midfielders. On the left, Sergei Milinkovic-Savic seems a definite starter. Not necessarily that he'll start on the left, because he kind of moves around the pitch, even playing as a defensive midfielder sometimes. In fact, he's coded as a central midfielder. But I think he's definitely going to be a starter no matter what formation they use or what position he's in. On the right, Dusan Tadic, again, not necessarily starting as a right attacking midfielder, because sometimes he played centrally, but they will definitely find a place for him on the pitch to play. And the central attacking midfielders is usually these two players when it's a different formation. So Sergei Milinkovic-Savic and Dusan Tadic also playing the central midfield role when the formation calls for it. And finally, we have the forwards. Alexander Mitrovic, definitely a starter. Dusan Vlahovic has started quite a few games, but I'm going to nominate him as a sometimes starter. I think he will start a couple of games. And Luka Jovic, barring some injury to the top two, I see him as a substitute. Unless something is wrong with the other two players. So there we go. That is our predictions on the starters. So we'll wait for the cup just to find out how wrong we are. Or we may find out that we're desperately wrong when we look at the September games. And that will be in the update podcast, which will come out in early to mid-November. And maybe some light will be shed on some of the things we've said here. So that brings us to the end of this podcast. So keep your eye out for that update podcast. And meanwhile, keep an eye on us at Soccerphiles Canada. That's Soccerphiles with a PH and an S at the end. And our website is Soccerphiles. Oh, I got to show the picture here, the graphic. The address there is at the bottom of the graphic. Soccerphiles.captivate.fm, and check the show notes, because we've been trying to improve our information in the show notes. There are all sorts of links to previous podcasts and to the group podcasts here. And thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.